Okay. All right. Let's keep going. Kim, what were the effects of the Columbian Exchange upon the Americas? Let's look at these four areas real quick. Let's start with diseases. What were the effects of disease, of the connection of these two world zones, and frankly, eventually, pretty quickly, the connection of all the world zones? What were the effects of disease? Aaron?
Well, it killed off a large percentage of the population of the New World when diseases from the Old World were exposed to people without the immunities in the New World, so a lot of people died.
Yeah. Do you remember the percentages, roughly, the rough range of percentage that is estimated to have died?
I don't remember the exact percentages, sorry.
Yeah, it's 50 to 90%. Holy cow. Yeah, holy cow. 50 to 90% survive. That's, die off. It's devastating. And it goes both ways, but more so in the larger world zone with a greater population and greater interactions with people, the immune systems of people in the Afro-Eurasia world zone were just significantly stronger. And the evolution of viruses, because of that, were stronger as well. So they show up to the Americas, and it's absolutely devastating, as much as 50 to 90%. I love Jon Stewart's quote. Have you ever heard Jon Stewart's quote about Thanksgiving? He's like, the quote is like, I'm going to celebrate Thanksgiving in a traditional way. I'm going to invite all my neighborhood over to my house for dinner, and then I'm going to shoot them and take their land. But really, in truth, it's more like I'm going to give them a disease and then take their land. It's pretty sad and pretty amazing how the effects of that. In many ways, though, the effects of that sort of creates a reset button, if you will, on the American continent, or continents, I should say, and allows for new countries, new peoples to experiment and to try new things, to take over new territories, to establish new governments, and that leads to the United States of America. So it's pretty fascinating, those effects, in bad and good ways, very, very much so. But pretty sad how devastating those diseases were. Real quick, for sake of your study, guys, what are some of the diseases that were the most impactful? We often blame one in particular, smallpox, yeah, but there were quite a few others. What were some of the others that were spread? Yeah, measles and mumps, SIFTA. Chickenpox was spread, exactly. Yeah. Syphilis was actually spread sort of in reverse, which is fascinating, is the sailors brought syphilis back with them to Europe. And the funny thing about that, you remember this from the Crash Course Big History? This is something I learned new from the Crash Course Big History video, was how all of these countries of Europe sort of blamed other countries for it instead of the Americas. They were like the Russians called it the Polish disease, and like the British called it the French disease or something like that. It's kind of funny. They all like blame each other for it, but yeah, it kind of cracks me up. Okay, what about animals? First of all, what new animals were brought to the Americas that had never been here? Tanner.
I don't think there were, if I remember correctly, there weren't, pigs, yeah. Pigs, I think cattle, and, yeah. Yes, you remember quite well, Daria.
Yeah.
Pigs and cattle primarily, yeah.
Yeah.
And then as far as other animals, not so much.
Yeah. You know what bird I wish wouldn't have died off? Was the dodo bird. They call it the dodo bird because it seems stupid to people. But the dodo bird was found on a particular island, and it was the top of the food chain on that island. They were like turkeys that were friendly because they were at the top of the food chain. When humans showed up, they had no reason to fear them because they didn't know to fear them, right? So they would just walk right up to them, and a human could just like crack, kill it, and eat it. And so they called them dodo birds because they thought they were stupid. But in reality, they were just the top of their food chain. And I wish that bird would have lasted. We might be eating dodo instead of chicken nowadays, because they were like plump birds. They were, anyway. I bet dodo would be pretty tasty. All right, so animals definitely get brought into the Americas. Horses is a significant improvement. When you think of the American Indian, we often think of people riding on horses bareback, right? But that's a new thing. That is not something that happened before Europeans showed up. Kind of fascinating. However, did animal life become more diverse in the planet or less diverse? Okay, less. Why? Who can tell me? Come, raise your hand. Come on, Mike. Who can tell me? Why did animal life become less diverse? Yeah, significantly less. Why? DJ, go ahead.
Okay, so because of the Columbian Exchange, first of all, there was just, people were like, oh, what's this new animal? I wonder if it tastes good. But that didn't have as big of an effect as the fact that they were trading things from different ecosystems. They were taking things out of the European ecosystem and putting them in America, and taking things out of the American ecosystem and putting them in Europe. And that kind of led to, yeah, exactly, invasive species killing the things there. Like tamaracks are hugely popular out here in the Mojave Desert, but they're not native. They came across with some people who came over here, and they've killed basically everything that they've touched.
What is a tamarack? I've never heard of that.
It's also called a salt cedar.
Still don't know. What is it?
There are these things with really, really deep roots that go down like 30 or 40 feet, I think, for like a tiny little bush. But they will wrap around the roots of other plants and take the water and stuff that the other plants are getting. So
yeah. Where I used to live in North Carolina, there's this vine. I think it's originally a Japanese vine, and it was brought into North Carolina originally. I think as a growth for feeding cows, if I remember right. Something along those lines. Anyway, it's taken over forests and it's destroying forests throughout the east. Because the vine is just choking them out. Tanner, go ahead.
So yeah, a while back I went and for one of my friend's Eagle Scout projects, we went and basically pulled up a bunch of salt cedars in this place, and those things were all over, man. We barely depleted any of them. It was like barely even made a dent as far as how many of those things there were. When there's water, that is, of course. When there's not, then they don't grow.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, so real quick, and Aaron, I want to come to you here in a second, so keep your hand up. But animals and plant life, well, plants do get exchanged, throughout the world, and definitely when it comes to diversity of our diets, the diversity of the human diet increases significantly, right? All of a sudden, things like the potato get introduced to Europe, and the sweet potato get introduced to Europe. The sweet potato and the potato are staples now in the Afro-Eurasia area of the world, right? Staples weren't there until people showed up in the Americas to get that plant, right? So the diversity of our diets, when you think of Mexican food, a lot of people think of rice. That came from Asia. There is a massive amount of greater diversity, and that allows for the human population to significantly grow. But because of that, a few crops and a few animals have become the dominant species of our planet, right, along with humans, and have kind of snuffed out. So we have seen a mass extinction on our planet to the scales not seen since major natural disasters 250 million years ago, or up to 60 million years ago anyway. Massive extinctions, and it's going to have some big effects. It'll be interesting to see what they are. Aaron, real quick, and then we'll wrap up.
It's interesting because it basically creates conditions of accelerated evolution because we've just changed the survival pressures as humans. So all these animals and plants are just adapting and filling different new niches that we've created by killing some species or allowing others to multiply. So it's just a new period of change of these animals. I mean, eventually maybe it'll stabilize, maybe it won't. Who knows?
Yeah. I love studying futurism, and towards the end of this semester, we're going to talk about the future. There's a fantastic text called The World in 2050, and the gentleman who wrote it is really writing from a perspective of the Earth is warming, which we know for a fact that it is. It's just a debate on how much it will warm in the future. But he comes from a perspective that the Earth is warming, and he essentially makes an argument that civilization has a northern future, that civilization will grow and migrate to like Canada and Russia and the northern region, right? And a lot of trade will happen over and through the North Pole region. Anyway, but he makes an argument in the end, and he asks a specific question. He doesn't say what he thinks it should be, but he says, do we want a planet with 10 billion people on it that eventually really struggles to bring everyone up to our level of standard of living? For example, for everyone in the world to live like the average Western European, we would need 3 planets worth of resources today. So it's not sustainable, right? We have to change how we get our resources, how we utilize our resources, and so forth, right, and our efficiencies. If we wanted everyone on the planet today to live like the average North American, we would need 6 planets worth of resources. So obviously there's going to be some significant changes. And he argues that a lot of those changes will be aggravating. A lot of those changes will be frustrating. A lot of those changes will be limiting eventually to us. Maybe wrong or right, but I think it's worth considering. He says, or what if we decide to cut down population, not by killing people, right, but by purposely making decisions to cut down the population, and we go back to about 1 billion people, and we have large swaths of the planet that are left to its own devices, right, to its own natural devices, and evolution continues to happen, and in its own ways, in its own natural environments, and so on and so forth. And he asked the question, what planet would you rather live in? A planet with 1 billion people and lots of open natural areas, or a planet with 10 billion people and a struggle for resources? It's an interesting question. Both have significant sacrifices. Likely one would mean population controls. And who wants to be told whether or not you can have kids? Right? Who wants to have population controls? Right? Like that doesn't sound awesome. That doesn't sound good. On the flip side, a world with 10 billion people struggling to have enough resources for everyone doesn't sound like an awesome place to have kids. It's a fascinating question. There's way more nuance to it than that, and there's a lot to be invented and created, that gives me hope. But it is, it is an interesting thing to consider. Yeah, China does. And in fact, though, Brandon, you have a really big, interesting question. China has that population. They just got rid of it, actually, the one-child policy. But for many years, they had this policy of you can only have 1 child. And yet they still saw significant growth for many reasons. But the growth has significantly come down, and it's now starting to kind of move backwards. And that's why they've stopped doing it, because they don't want to move backwards. But what's fascinating about that, a lot of sociologists say they would have seen similar growth patterns had they not. In the same trajectory of their wealth and education, they would have seen roughly similar results. They didn't have to do what they did.